Hello, we are back. The collective we, the royal we are back. I am Commander Sparkles a lot, and we are here today to talk about another book, another booksy, another story, another delving into the creative mind of another human being. And today we are going to speak of Stranger of Tempest, which is not actually a book that gets spoken about a lot. It is quite a fun ride, although I will be criticizing. I will be judging. Not harshly, gently. Just like a lover's caress, letting people know exactly what could have been improved on, what might have been better, but I mean, that's just my opinion, so never know. So, Stranger of Tempest is a gritty, dark fantasy. We'll leave it at that. It is the first book in a series, so we always have to hold that on the forefront when we are judging a novel, because many times, especially for an author who might be just starting off, things can go a bit slow. The author might be shifting things. So sometimes book 2, book 3 can really expound upon what was lacking in book 1. But generally speaking, when an author does know that they are going to be building a series, the first book is supposed to be building up the world. And that is probably what is most lacking in this series. So we are following a mercenary by the name of Lynx, which, not the most original of names, but still kind of fun. He is a portly, heavy-set man, which is kind of becomes a thing in the novel because he's very much in love with food, and there is a good reason for that because of his unfortunate background. And he was a former Sohan soldier, and Sohan was, there's not a huge amount that's spoken about it, but it is a country that eventually started going around attacking every other country around it, trying to build an empire until it crumbled to dust. But until that was halted, until the dreams of empire vanquished into the ether, Sohan murdered, raped, and butchered their way across so many countries. So he is very much not liked by some people. And you do see these aspects in some instances where he is shit on, harassed, or just kind of hated because of his ethnicity and who he was. And he was a soldier, he was a commando in the army, so he did do some pretty horrendous stuff, although that is what makes Lynx, he kind of holds the whole story together, because his background and how he did these pretty bad things and then stopped himself and pulled himself away from the army and eventually was thrown in prison and spent many years in prison. And from what it's explained, it is a very horrendous situation that he's lived in there. And so he kind of was punished for the things he did, and he was betrayed by his own people, thrown in prison, used like a dog, and then eventually comes out. And now he's sort of this solo, doesn't really trust people, doesn't really care, just kind of is dealing with his trauma as he wanders around the land, until he gets drawn into this mercenary group who hire him for an easy job. Quotation marks, the moment someone says it's an easy job, it's probably not going to be an easy job. But he believed them. It turned out to be false. And he and his new mercenary crew ended up in a shitstorm of trouble. And the basic premise of the book really is hyper-focused on him and this mercenary crew dealing with each other as they, for all intents and purposes, run the fuck away from a huge army, well, not a huge army, but a rather large group of people who are chasing after them for this thing that they had been involved in. It is basically they were hired for a rescue, and the rescue turned out to be not exactly how they thought it would be, and now they're screwed and they're running away. And so that's really the basic premise, with a lot of flashbacks and Lynx pondering on his childhood, his youth, and his time in the army and his time in prison, and how he got to how he is and how he's sort of dealing with all of his trauma. And really the only big thing I could say besides seeing Lynx's, I don't even want to call it development, because he's not really developing himself as a person in the moment as they go along. Lynx is kind of static. You're just kind of seeing how his past has made him who he is now, which is still very, very fascinating. The only other aspect of the series or the book is can really, really draw you in is the action. There is some phenomenal action. It's very well detailed out. Very fast paced, really, really quick. And the author did some pretty interesting stuff. So there is a magic system, which is not detailed out really in the slightest. If anything, the weakest point in this is that you get a peek at sort of these concepts, but just like a little nudged, little tiny little peek at how the magic works. And there's elementals in the world who are the embodiment of these elemental magics, and you know that there was gods, and there are these fragments of stones that imbue magic, and people are able to use those things, but that's all you know. Throughout the entire book, you just really never ever find out properly what the heck these gods are, who they are, how they really affected things, what's happening in the larger world. There's a small, tiny peek that maybe there's some bigger picture happening in regards to the person that the mercenary crew and Lynx saves. But again, you don't really understand any of it. Nothing is explained in the slightest. So it is really just a rescue and chase novel with a really cool embellishment of the main character Lynx's past, so you can sort of get this emotional attachment to Lynx himself, who is sort of a fun character, but to a degree, he's someone who embodies sort of his own personal morality of what he thinks is right or wrong, and so that makes him quite interesting. But the rest of the crew, I mean, they're fun, don't get me wrong. They are enjoyable. I mean, it is a typical sort of merc crew where everyone's just drinking and partying, and so it's sort of enjoyable to watch. But you don't, as far as for me, I didn't care about anyone else in the book except for Lynx. Nobody. I didn't care about the other mercenaries. I didn't care about the woman who they had rescued. I didn't care about, there is another woman who Lynx is personally involved in rescuing, who becomes part of their group. I didn't really care about her either. Unfortunately, you just kind of end the book with only really caring about Lynx and nobody else. The others are just sort of fun people along for the ride. You even do spend a couple of chapters in the head of the enemy who is pursuing them, but again, there doesn't seem to be any purpose. Like I didn't get anything from being on the opposing side and understanding the person who was chasing them, because it was just very much like, I'm a military person and this is what we're doing, we're chasing them. So you didn't really understand more about the enemy personally, the individual. You didn't get to know more about her, the structure, or why her group is doing what they're doing. You don't really care about any of it. At least this is how I interpreted it. It's possible other people are going to get more from that, but to be honest, I just didn't feel it. But again, it is still a very fun book. Lynx is a fun, fascinating character. And the action is, and as I was saying before, so there is a little bit of the magic system which is described in this book, and one of the primary ways that the magic is used by non-mages, because you really don't see any magic being used barely at all, except by one of the side characters who barely knows how to use her magic either, so it's sort of just one or two things she's able to do. But the magic is used with weaponry, so people do use swords and bows, but almost everyone in the crew is using a mage gun, and they can basically put these, I don't know if they're crystals, or it's just basically, you could think of it as like a bullet, but this bullet is imbued with magic. So there are sparkers, there are boomers, so earth elemental magic, or fire elemental magic, or lightning elemental magic, or even ice. So they're called icers. So there's different kinds of bullets, which when used, you shoot them, and then it casts like the spell in the moment. So an icer is more what we would typically think of as a normal bullet. It's just like an ice thing that just shoots right through someone, whereas let's say an earth elemental magic will go and it's literally just like being impacted by a boulder. It just hits them. It's just this gigantic force. Or a sparker, which if I'm remembering correctly, that will like basically zap the shit out of everyone. Or that could be the fire one. Mixing it up now. Yeah, basically you get the point. Burn, ice, fire, bat, 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 magic, poof. And people can shoot it out of a gun. Boom, boom, boom. And if that doesn't work, you pull out your sword, you decapitate the person. And Lynx is very good at both of these, even though he's slightly overweight. Like I said, this is a high focus of the book in many parts. Lynx is a little bit of a heavier dude, although there was reasoning there as well, which is kind of sweet and sad when you understand his attachment to food and how he's sort of like given himself this one creature comfort. So that is a sweet part. Lynx is really the only reason to read this book. He's probably the nicest demonstration of I don't even want to think of it really as a, sort of bad person becomes good, because he was just a young boy who was taken into the army. He was good at it, and then he pushed back against it because he realized everything was bad. It's not that he was some evil, twisted fucker who, had this massive change of heart and owes people something. He was a boy who got conscripted. He did what he had to for his country in those times, and then his innate morality won out, and he pushed back against those things. So he was never a bad person. He was just a good person who unfortunately did some bad things. But he's still, it is a fascinating take on trauma when you look at how he is and how the author shows in small instances his fears and how his past has affected how he is now. Whether it's in his relations with the people around him, or whether it's just how he deals with certain scenarios and environments. So that is definitely, the author did a really good job showcasing that through Lynx. The one thing I will say is this book has some pretty badass cool monsters. The final showdown at the end of the book, where the party is attempting to kill this giant baddie, it is very cool, very well done. And there is, again, it is frustrating. There is this entire lore about this past ancient civilization within the novel, the Duergar, I think they're called. And I don't know if they were supposed to be maybe dwarves, like this version of the dwarven people, but they're supposed to be these magical beings who were highly civilized, had a highly advanced civilization and lived underground and in mountains and whatnot. And they had some pretty wicked things that you kind of get a peek at, but again, nothing is explained. So really, I would recommend reading this book. It is very possible, I have not read the second book yet, it's very possible that he turns things around and the author like really manages to make, I keep saying the author, but I'm just realizing I cannot remember his name. What is his name? Tom Lloyd. Thank you. I was blanking. So Tom could perhaps in book 2 have really delved more into the history and lore and make things into something a little bit more big picture, possibly. I'll have to check it out and get back to you once I do that. But for book 1, really, there is no real setup. It's barely there. So if you're going to read this, just kind of focus on it more as a standalone sort of just action, fun ride, adventure, mercenary group, and sort of ignore the fact that things are not built upon properly, that we get too many peaks without any proper explanation. Excuse me. I'm not COVIDian. I'm simply in Canada. It's snowing so much. But yeah, so my fellow friends, check this out. Action, adventure, check. Cool traumatic backstory, check. Shitty side character development. World that looks semi-interesting, but unfortunately is never properly expressed. So that's what I have to offer you with this novel. It is really just a fun ride with one person. Forget everybody else. And maybe you'll think differently. Maybe you like the development of the side characters. Maybe you feel like the world was developed more than I did. But I am not feeling it. But again, we will see with book 2 how it goes.